Imagine a species so quietly powerful that their mere absence sends shockwaves through an entire galaxy. For 300 years, humans had been the laughingstock of the Galactic Council, the primitive newcomers who somehow stumbled into space travel, the weaklings who needed protection, the charity case that advanced civilizations tolerated out of pity. But what happens when those primitive humans simply disappear? What terror grips the hearts of ancient alien empires when they realize that the species they mocked might have been the only thing standing between them and something far worse? What secrets did humanity carry in their silence? And why does their sudden withdrawal leave the most powerful beings in the galaxy scrambling in panic? This is the story of the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one you should have been listening to all along. Sometimes the species you underestimate is the one holding everything together. And sometimes, when humans decide they've had enough and walk away without a word, the universe itself holds its breath. The Galactic Council thought they knew humans. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they had been. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 17 kilometers of polished metamorphic crystal, its soaring walls designed to accommodate beings ranging from the microscopic Taith to the mountain-sized Corvani. Today, as had been the case for the past 3 centuries, representatives from 473 different species gathered to discuss matters of galactic importance. The air hummed with translation matrices, converting thousands of different languages, chemical signatures, and electromagnetic pulses into comprehensible communication. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valerian Empire adjusted his ceremonial armor and gazed across the vast assembly with satisfaction. The Valorians had held the council presidency for the past 50 years, and, under his leadership, galactic civilization had reached unprecedented heights of prosperity and order. Trade routes flourished, conflicts were settled through diplomatic channels, and the various species maintained their traditional hierarchies without significant disruption. Well, almost without disruption. Zethkri's golden eyes narrowed as they found the small, unremarkable section reserved for the human delegation. The humans, such an odd little species. They had stumbled into galactic society roughly 300 years ago with their primitive chemical rockets and crude fusion reactors, somehow managing to achieve faster-than-light travel through what the Corvani Academy of Sciences had dismissed as brute force engineering lacking any mathematical elegance. The humans had been granted membership in the council more out of curiosity than respect. They were the first species to achieve interstellar travel while still using projectile weapons and combustion engines for surface transportation. Their technology was a bizarre patchwork of innovations that shouldn't have worked according to established scientific principles, yet somehow did. The Taith had classified them as a statistical anomaly, while the ancient Eldery simply called them amusing. For 3 centuries, the human delegation had sat quietly in their assigned section, rarely speaking during debates, never proposing major legislation, and generally conducting themselves with what most council members interpreted as appropriate deference to their betters. They paid their membership dues on time, participated in joint research projects when invited, and served as a useful example of how even the most primitive species could find a place in galactic civilization if they knew their role. The humans' representative today was Ambassador Sarah Chun, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and unremarkable features by human standards. She sat in her simple clothing among delegates wearing everything from powered exoskeletons to environmental suits filled with exotic gases. Next to the crystalline beauty of the Valerian delegation or the magnificent bulk of the Corvani representatives, she looked almost comically out of place. Zethkri had always found the humans' humility refreshing. They never demanded special treatment, never complained about their low status in the council hierarchy, and never caused diplomatic incidents. In fact, they were so quiet and accommodating that sometimes entire sessions passed without any reference to them at all. Perfect junior members of galactic civilization. The 743rd session of the Galactic Council will come to order, Zethkri announced, his voice carried across the hall by acoustic amplifiers. Today's primary agenda concerns the ongoing border dispute between the hegemony of 12 suns and the Crystalline Collective, as well as updates on the joint terraforming project in the Andromeda Spiral. The usual business proceeded with typical efficiency. The hegemony and the collective presented their cases regarding mining rights in a contested system. Various economic reports were filed, and several minor species requested assistance with infrastructure development. The humans, as always, remained silent observers. It was during the lunch recess that something unusual happened. Ambassador Chen quietly approached the central dais where Zeth was reviewing afternoon agenda items. "Honored President," she said, offering the traditional bow of respect. Her voice was soft and carried a slight accent that the translation matrix couldn't quite eliminate. "Ambassador Chen," Zeth replied with polite condescension. "How may the presidency assist humanity today? Do you require additional time to review the terraforming proposals? I understand the technical specifications might be challenging for your people to fully comprehend." Chen's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes flickered for just a moment. "Actually, Honored President, I've come to submit formal notice of humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." The words seemed to hang in the air for several seconds before Zeth processed them. "I'm sorry. I believe the translation matrix may have malfunctioned. Did you say withdrawal?" "Withdrawal from the Galactic Council, yes." Chen reached into her simple briefcase and produced a crystal data chip. "This contains all necessary documentation, including the transfer of our remaining territorial obligations to the Valerian Empire, our final membership dues payment, and formal notification to all current treaty partners." Zeth stared at the data chip as if it were a small explosive device. "Ambassador Chen, this is highly irregular. Withdrawal requires extensive deliberation, impact studies, transition periods. Species don't simply leave the Council. The economic disruptions alone. We've handled the transition quietly over the past several months," Chen replied calmly. "All our obligations have been fulfilled or transferred. Our research partnerships have been concluded with full documentation provided to our colleagues. Our trade agreements include standard termination clauses that we've invoked with appropriate notice." "But why?" Zeth found himself genuinely confused. "Has humanity suffered some grievance? Have you been mistreated? Your species has prospered under Council protection. Your population has grown, your territory expanded, your technology advanced through collaboration with more developed civilizations." Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the vast assembly hall around them. Hundreds of species conducted their business, made their deals, exercised their influence according to carefully maintained hierarchies that had existed for millennia. "We're grateful for the opportunities the Council provided," she said finally. "But we've learned what we came to learn. It's time for us to pursue our own path." "Learn what you came to learn." Zeth confusion deepened. "Ambassador, with respect, humanity stumbled into galactic civilization by accident. Your species achieved interstellar travel through crude trial and error, not sophisticated planning." The flicker in Chen's eyes appeared again, stronger this time, almost like amusement. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's what we wanted you to think." Before Zeth could respond, Chen placed the data chip on his desk. "The formal documents include contact information should any urgent matters arise, though we expect our withdrawal will cause minimal disruption. We've been very careful about that. Ambassador, please reconsider. Surely we can address whatever concerns." "There are no concerns to address," Chen interrupted gently. "This isn't about dissatisfaction or conflict. We simply have other priorities now." "What priorities could possibly supersede membership in galactic civilization?" "Your species will be isolated, cut off from the greatest collaborative effort in the history of the universe." Chen smiled then, and, for reasons he couldn't explain, that smile made Zeth profoundly uncomfortable. "Honored President, do you know what lies beyond the galactic rim?" "Beyond the rim? Nothing of significance. Empty space, dark matter, perhaps a few rogue star systems. Why would anyone concern themselves with such desolate regions?" "Perhaps," Chen said. "Thank you for 3 centuries of educational cooperation." She turned and walked away, her simple shoes making soft sounds against the crystal floor. Zeth watched her go, still holding the data chip, and trying to process what had just occurred. In 3,000 years of Galactic Council history, no species had ever simply withdrawn. There were procedures, protocols, committees that handled such theoretical scenarios, but They were ancient bureaucratic relics that nobody expected to ever use. Within an hour, word of humanity's withdrawal had spread throughout the council. The initial reaction was primarily amusement and mild confusion. The elderly delegation found it charmingly dramatic, while the Taith calculated the minimal economic impact and dismissed the entire affair as statistically insignificant. But as the hours passed and council analysts began reviewing the documentation Chun had provided, the amusement began to fade. The humans hadn't simply walked away from their obligations. They had systematically concluded or transferred every single responsibility, relationship, and agreement with meticulous precision. Trade partnerships had been terminated months ago with alternative suppliers already identified for their former partners. Research collaborations had been completed with all data properly transferred and archived. More puzzling still was the realization that humanity had been quietly liquidating their galactic assets for nearly a year. Properties sold, investments withdrawn, materials and equipment shipped back to human space. They hadn't just decided to leave. They had been planning this withdrawal for an extended period. It's almost as if they wanted to disappear without leaving any loose ends, observed Counselor Thax of the Economic Analysis Division as he presented his findings to an emergency session of the council leadership. But why? Demanded Zethkri. What could motivate such secrecy, such extensive preparation for withdrawal? The elderly representative, whose species prided itself on understanding the motivations of younger civilizations, offered his perspective. Perhaps they felt overlooked or undervalued. Humans can be emotionally driven. This might be an elaborate attention-seeking gesture. If they wanted attention, why withdraw in the most discreet manner possible? Countered the Corvani delegate. Our analysis suggests they deliberately minimized disruption and publicity. As reports continued to arrive, the true scope of humanity's quiet departure became clear. Not only had they withdrawn from the council, but human ships were systematically evacuating every human settlement, station, and facility outside their original territorial boundaries. Orbital installations were being mothballed, mining operations shut down, research outposts abandoned. They're pulling back to Earth and their core colonies, reported Intelligence Director Vashtar. Complete population consolidation within their original borders. Are they expecting an attack? Asked the Crystalline Collective representative, their voice chiming like musical glass. This resembles defensive positioning. Defensive against whom? Zethkri spread his hands in frustration. Humanity has no significant enemies. Their military is primitive by galactic standards, and they've never been involved in any major conflicts. That evening, as the great assembly hall emptied and representatives returned to their quarters, a strange quiet settled over the council complex. For 3 centuries, the humans had been such a constant, unremarkable presence that their absence felt oddly conspicuous, like a sound you didn't realize you were hearing until it stopped. Zethkri remained in his office late into the night, reviewing every interaction he could remember having with human representatives over the decades. They had always been polite, cooperative, seemingly eager to please. They accepted their position in the council hierarchy without complaint, participated in joint projects without trying to take credit, and generally conducted themselves as model junior members of galactic society. So why did their departure feel less like the loss of a minor member and more like the removal of a crucial support beam? The next morning brought the first disturbing report. The human delegation's former quarters had been found completely empty, cleaned with extraordinary thoroughness. Not just their personal belongings, everything. Furniture, equipment, even the specialized atmospheric processors that had been installed to accommodate human physiology. The rooms looked as if humans had never occupied them at all. They took everything, reported the facility manager, a nervous Taith whose compound eyes darted constantly as he spoke. Even removed and patched the wall fixtures they had installed. It's as if they wanted to eliminate any trace of their presence. More reports followed throughout the day. Human embassy compounds on dozens of worlds had been similarly emptied and abandoned. In many cases, local authorities hadn't even realized the humans were leaving until they found empty buildings with perfectly clean facilities and no forwarding addresses. This level of coordination suggests extensive advanced planning, observed military advisor Kefran. But planning for what purpose? If they simply wanted to isolate themselves, why the elaborate secrecy? The question that no one wanted to voice directly was becoming increasingly obvious. What did the humans know that the rest of the galaxy didn't? By the third day after humanity's withdrawal, subtle signs of unease were beginning to appear throughout Council space. Several border monitoring stations reported unusual energy readings from the direction of human territory, though long-range scans revealed nothing obviously threatening. Trade ships that normally carried goods to human worlds found their access politely, but firmly denied at the border of human space. "We're not permitted to proceed further," reported Captain Vorth of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. Human Border Patrol was courteous, but absolute. "They've declared their entire territory off-limits to non-human vessels." "Since when do humans have the military capacity to enforce border closures?" demanded Trade Minister Yithral. "Their fleet consists of primitive vessels with chemical propulsion." But when Council intelligence attempted to verify human military capabilities through routine surveillance, they made a disturbing discovery. The ships monitoring human borders were unlike anything in the Council's extensive database of human technology. Sleek, advanced, clearly using some form of exotic propulsion that produced no detectable emissions. Ships that shouldn't have existed according to 3 centuries of human technology assessments. "Either humanity has made extraordinary advances in secret," reported Chief Intelligence Analyst Dr. Mortain, "or these aren't human ships at all. Are you suggesting humanity has made contact with an unknown species?" Zethkri felt a chill despite his office's carefully maintained temperature. "I'm suggesting we may have fundamentally misunderstood what humanity is capable of." As the 4th day dawned, the first signs of panic began to appear in galactic markets. Currency fluctuations, shipping delays, insurance premiums rising as underwriters tried to assess unknown risks. The human withdrawal, initially dismissed as a minor curiosity, was beginning to have measurable economic impacts. But the economics were secondary to a growing sense of unease that seemed to affect every species in Council space. Something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's carefully maintained balance, and no one could quite identify what it was. In his private quarters, Zethkri stood before the great viewing wall that showed the galaxy in all its spiral majesty. Hundreds of billions of stars, thousands of civilizations, an intricate web of relationships and dependencies that had taken millennia to establish. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace and prosperity across this vast expanse. So why did the departure of one quiet little species make everything feel so precarious? As if in response to his question, his communication system chimed with an urgent priority message from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. The message was brief and terrifying in its simplicity. Unknown vessels detected approaching galactic rim. Configuration and technology unidentified. Estimated time to nearest inhabited systems, 72 hours. Zethkri read the message 3 times before its implications fully registered. Then, he reached for the emergency communication array with hands that trembled slightly. For the first time in Council history, a galaxy-wide emergency alert was about to be issued. And the species that might have warned them, might have explained what was coming, had just withdrawn into complete silence. The humans were gone, and something else was coming. Something that made the galaxy's most advanced civilizations suddenly feel very, very primitive. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within 6 hours of the first contact alert, a record time that reflected the unprecedented nature of the situation. The Great Assembly Hall buzzed with nervous energy as representatives hurried to their positions, many having traveled through dangerous hyperspace corridors to reach the Council complex in time. Zethkri stood at the central podium, his usually pristine ceremonial armor hastily assembled and slightly askew. Around him, the massive display screens showed tactical readouts from the Deep Space Monitoring Network, a constellation of sensor platforms that had watched the galactic borders for over 2 millennia without detecting anything more threatening than the occasional rogue asteroid. "Fellow representatives," Zethkri began, his voice carrying across the crystal hall with unusual urgency. "We face a situation without precedent in Council history. Unknown vessels of clearly advanced design have been detected approaching our galaxy from the void beyond the rim." The tactical displays shifted to show long-range sensor readings. The images were grainy and distorted by the enormous distances involved, but they clearly showed massive structures moving through space with purpose and coordination. Ships, if they could be called that, which dwarfed even the largest Corvani dreadnoughts. Our xenotechnology specialists have analyzed the available data, continued Dr. Mortain as she took the podium. These vessels employ propulsion systems that produce no emissions detectable by our most advanced sensors. Their hulls appear to be constructed from materials that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics. And their size. She paused, consulting her notes with visible unease. The largest detected vessel is approximately 400 kilometers in length. A collective murmur of alarm swept through the assembly. The Corvani Empire's greatest warship, the Pride of Mountains, measured barely 12 kilometers from bow to stern and was considered a miracle of engineering. Something 40 times that size was beyond anyone's comprehension. What are their intentions? Demanded Admiral Thekvor of the hegemony of 12 Suns. Have they responded to our communication attempts? We've transmitted greetings in over 3,000 languages and communication protocols, replied Communications Director Yilthan. The approaching vessels have maintained complete silence. However, he hesitated, clearly reluctant to continue. Our analysis of their trajectory suggests they're heading directly for the most heavily populated sectors of Council space. The chamber erupted in concerned voices as representatives tried to process the implications. An unknown species with technology that exceeded anything in the galaxy, approaching with apparent hostile intent, and completely unresponsive to diplomatic overtures. What defensive measures can we implement? Asked the Crystalline Collective representative, their normally melodious voice sharp with worry. Fleet Admiral Kefran activated the military assessment displays. We've placed all Council Defense Forces on maximum alert and begun evacuating non-essential personnel from border systems. However, I must be frank with this assembly. If these unknown vessels possess technology as advanced as our preliminary analysis suggests, our current defensive capabilities may prove insufficient. The word insufficient hung in the air like a death sentence. The Council Defense Forces represented the combined military might of nearly 500 species, equipped with weapons that could shatter planets and shields that could deflect stellar radiation. The idea that such power might be insufficient against an unknown enemy was almost incomprehensible. Perhaps, suggested Elder Myeneth of the Ancient Eldery, we should consider diplomatic solutions. These beings, whoever they are, may simply be explorers like ourselves. Their silence could indicate unfamiliarity with our communication methods. Then, why? Interrupted Intelligence Director Vashtar. Did they begin accelerating toward our most populated systems immediately after entering detection range? Our analysis indicates they changed course to intercept major trade routes and population centers. The elderly representative's luminescent skin dimmed noticeably. I see. That does suggest less benevolent intentions. As the debate continued, a growing sense of helplessness pervaded the assembly. For 3 millennia, the Galactic Council had represented the pinnacle of cooperative civilization. They had solved problems through technology, diplomacy, and the combined wisdom of hundreds of species. But, faced with an unknown threat that exceeded their understanding, their carefully constructed systems seemed suddenly fragile. It was during this mounting crisis that Counselor Yexhara of the Records Division made a disturbing discovery. While reviewing historical data to search for any precedent for the current situation, she had noticed several anomalies in humanity's recent council interactions. Honored President, she announced, requesting permission to address the assembly. I believe our current crisis may be connected to humanity's recent withdrawal. The chamber fell silent. Several representatives had privately wondered about the timing of humanity's departure, but no one had been willing to suggest a connection to such a massive threat. Explain, ordered Zethkri. Yexhara activated her data displays, showing a timeline of human activities over the past year. Our analysis reveals that humanity began their systematic withdrawal approximately 11 months ago. This coincides precisely with several unexplained phenomena that we previously dismissed as unrelated incidents. The displays shifted to show various reports from across Council space. Deep space exploration missions that had been mysteriously canceled. scientific research projects that had been quietly terminated, trade routes that had been subtly rerouted away from certain regions. All of these decisions were made either by humans or by organizations with significant human involvement, Yexhara continued. It's as if they were gradually steering council activities away from specific areas of space. Areas of space that, added Dr. Mortain, checking her own data, happened to lie along the trajectory of the approaching unknown vessels. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. Either humanity had possessed advanced knowledge of the approaching threat, or, are you suggesting, asked Admiral Thekvor slowly, that humanity is somehow connected to these unknown vessels? I'm suggesting, replied Yexhara carefully, that humanity's behavior over the past year indicates knowledge of events that the rest of the Council was unaware of. The silence that followed was broken by an urgent communication from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. The unknown vessels had begun transmitting, not to the Council, but to coordinates within human space. The transmissions are heavily encrypted using mathematical principles we don't recognize, reported Communications Director Yilthan. However, we've detected response transmissions from human territory using the same encryption. The chamber erupted in shocked voices as the horrible possibility became undeniable. The humans, dismissed for 3 centuries as primitive and harmless, were in communication with an unknown alien force that possessed technology beyond galactic comprehension. Emergency contact protocols with human leadership, ordered Zethkri. Immediate priority. The response came within minutes, transmitted from human space in clear galactic standard language. The Human Colonial Authority acknowledges the Galactic Council's request for communication. However, we are currently unable to accept diplomatic contact. We suggest the Council prepare for significant changes in galactic political structure. Further communication will be initiated at our discretion. The message was brief, formal, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Not only were the humans in contact with the unknown force, but they were apparently coordinating some kind of fundamental change to galactic civilization. Treachery, hissed the crystalline collective representative. They've been planning this for decades, perhaps centuries, playing the role of harmless primitives while secretly allying with hostile aliens. But why? Demanded Zethkri. What could they possibly gain from betraying galactic civilization? They've been our junior partners, protected and nurtured by our superior technology and wisdom. It was Elder Mieneth who provided the answer, her voice barely above a whisper. What if we were never superior? What if they were never our junior partners? What if everything we believed about humanity was deliberately false? The question hung in the air like a curse. 300 years of assumptions, 300 years of carefully maintained hierarchies, 300 years of believing they understood humanity's place in galactic society, all potentially built on a foundation of lies. Impossible, stated the Corvani representative firmly. We've monitored their technology development, observed their industrial capacity, assessed their military capabilities. They're generations behind Council standard in every measurable category. What we've observed, corrected Dr. Mortain grimly, is what they've allowed us to observe. As if to emphasize her point, new data began streaming in from border monitoring stations. The unknown vessels had begun deploying smaller craft, thousands of them, spreading across multiple star systems with mathematical precision. And, according to sensor readings, these smaller vessels were also using technology that exceeded Council understanding. Fleet composition analysis indicates a coordinated invasion force, reported Fleet Admiral Kefran. Multiple vessel classes, strategic deployment patterns, and... He paused, studying his displays with growing alarm. Energy signatures that suggest weapon systems capable of planetary bombardment. The reality of their situation was becoming undeniable. An unknown alien force with superior technology was approaching Council space with apparent hostile intent, and humanity, the species they had considered primitive and harmless, was somehow allied with this threat. What are our defensive options? Asked Zethkri. Limited, admitted Admiral Kefran. We can mobilize the entire Council defense fleet, but, based on preliminary analysis of their technology, our weapons may prove ineffective. Our shields might not withstand their offensive capabilities. Evacuation protocols. Impossible on the scale required. We're talking about potentially billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The logistics alone. For the first time in 3,000 years of council history, the assembled representatives faced a problem they couldn't solve through technology, diplomacy, or cooperative effort. They were facing a superior force with unknown motivations and apparently no interest in peaceful resolution. There must be something, insisted Elder Myeneth. Some way to negotiate, to find common ground. With humanity? Asked Zethkri bitterly. The species that spent 3 centuries lying to us about their true capabilities? The species that apparently conspired with hostile aliens while accepting our protection and resources. But even as anger and betrayal filled the chamber, a more disturbing possibility was beginning to emerge in the minds of the more perceptive representatives. What if humanity hadn't allied with hostile aliens? What if the approaching force was humanity itself? The possibility seemed absurd at first consideration. Humanity's known territory contained perhaps 50 star systems and a few billion individuals. Their technology, based on 3 centuries of observation, was crude and inefficient. Their military consisted of chemical-powered vessels that barely qualified as interstellar craft. But what if none of that was true? What if humanity's true territory extended far beyond their claimed borders? What if their actual population numbered in the trillions? What if their technology was so advanced that they could make their ships appear primitive while concealing capabilities that exceeded anything in council space? Xenological analysis request, announced Dr. Yithmos of the Biological Research Division as she took the podium. We've been reviewing 3 centuries of data about human biology, psychology, and social structures. Several anomalies have emerged that we previously dismissed as species variations. The displays shifted to show comparative analysis charts. Human genetic diversity was unusually high for a species that claimed to originate from a single world. Their psychological profiles showed adaptation patterns typically associated with species that had survived multiple extinction events. Their social structures demonstrated organizational capabilities that should have required much longer evolutionary development. In hindsight, continued Dr. Yithmos, humanity shows biological and cultural characteristics consistent with a species that has been spacefaring for significantly longer than their claimed 300 years. How much longer? Asked Zethkri, though he dreaded the answer. Based on genetic diversity analysis and cultural complexity markers, possibly thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. The implications were staggering. If humanity had been spacefaring for millennia before joining the Council, then their primitive technology, their accidental achievement of FTL travel, their crude understanding of galactic politics, all of it had been an elaborate deception. But why? What could motivate such an extensive, long-term charade? The answer came in another urgent communication from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. Long-range sensors had detected something that changed everything. Behind the approaching unknown vessels, hidden in their sensor shadows, were massive structures that defied comprehension. Artificial constructs on a scale that made the largest space stations look like toys. Preliminary analysis suggests artificial habitats, reported the lead sensor technician. Rotating cylinder configurations designed to house billions of individuals. And the materials, we're seeing engineering on the scale of stellar construction. A mobile civilization, whispered Elder Myeneth. They're not just visiting our galaxy. They're bringing their entire society with them. As the scope of what they faced became clear, panic began to spread through council space. Not just an invasion, but a migration. A technologically superior civilization arriving with the infrastructure to establish permanent presence in the galaxy. And, somehow, humanity was connected to this massive undertaking. The communication channels erupted with emergency broadcasts from across council territory. Civilian populations demanding answers, military commanders requesting orders, scientific institutions trying to analyze technology that seemed to violate known physical laws. But, in the Great Assembly Hall, the representatives of galactic civilization sat in stunned silence, finally, understanding the magnitude of their situation. They had welcomed humanity into their society as primitive children requiring guidance and protection. They had condescended to them, patronized them, and dismissed them as harmless curiosities. Now those same humans were apparently coordinating with a force that could reshape galactic civilization according to their will. And the Council had less than 60 hours to figure out how to respond. As Zethkri looked around the chamber at his fellow representatives, beings who had considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic evolution and wisdom, he realized that everything they thought they knew about the universe was about to change forever. The humans had withdrawn silently, taking their secrets with them. And those secrets, it appeared, included the knowledge that humanity was never the primitive species they pretended to be. They were something far more dangerous, a civilization advanced enough to hide their true nature for centuries while quietly learning everything about their potential enemies. And now those enemies were about to discover what humanity was really capable of. The revelation hit galactic civilization like a quantum cascade failure, spreading panic and disbelief across hundreds of star systems in a matter of hours. Emergency broadcasts flooded communication networks as species after species grappled with the impossible reality that humanity, the harmless, primitive newcomers they had tolerated for 3 centuries, might actually be orchestrating their downfall. In the Valerian Empire's military command center, General Vexthera stared at tactical displays that made no sense according to everything she had learned about warfare and technology. The approaching fleet wasn't just large, it was operating under principles that seemed to ignore fundamental laws of physics. Ships that should have taken months to cross interstellar distances were moving as if space itself bent to their will. "Ma'am," reported her intelligence officer, "we've detected temporal distortions around the unknown vessels. It's as if they're manipulating local space-time to reduce travel time." Temporal manipulation? Vexthera's scaled hide rippled with involuntary fear. That's theoretical technology. Our greatest scientists consider it impossible. Yes, ma'am. Impossible according to our understanding. But the sensor readings are conclusive. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place in every major military installation. The Corvani war princes, bred for battle across thousands of generations, found themselves facing enemy capabilities that exceeded their most pessimistic strategic assessments. The crystalline hive minds of the collective, accustomed to processing millions of tactical variables simultaneously, crashed into recursive loops when they tried to calculate response scenarios to technology they couldn't comprehend. But perhaps nowhere was the psychological impact greater than in the ancient halls of the Eldery Conclave, where beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for over 10,000 years struggled to understand how they could have been so completely deceived. "We prided ourselves on our wisdom," Elder Vaitesh said, her luminescent form dim with shame. "We believed our age and experience made us superior to younger species. We saw humanity's primitive technology and assumed primitive minds. The question," replied Elder Codheron, "is whether this deception represents malevolence or merely prudent caution. If humanity possessed advanced technology, perhaps they hid it to avoid triggering defensive responses from established powers. Does the motivation matter now?" Elder Vaitesh gestured toward the tactical displays showing the approaching fleet. "Whether through malice or caution, we face a force that may be capable of overwhelming everything we've built." The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Eldery Deep Space Observatory Network. What they had discovered sent chills through even their ancient consciousness. Detailed analysis of the approaching vessels revealed construction techniques and material compositions that matched theoretical designs from humanity's earliest scientific literature. "They've been planning this for generations," whispered Elder Codheron, "perhaps since before they even made contact with us." Meanwhile, in Council space, civilian populations were beginning to react to emergency broadcasts about the approaching threat. On Corvani Prime, massive beings who had never known fear found themselves experiencing an emotion their language barely had words for. Valerian citizens, raised to believe their empire represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, watched their leaders struggle with problems that had no obvious solutions. The Taith, with their microscopic perspective and collective intelligence, perhaps understood the situation most clearly. Their analysis revealed patterns in human behavior that suggested a level of long-term strategic thinking that exceeded anything in recorded galactic history. Humans have been gathering intelligence, Their collective consciousness reported to the Emergency Council session. Not just political or military intelligence, but deep analysis of every species' psychology, technology, social structures, and potential responses to various scenarios. They've been studying us like laboratory specimens. The implications were staggering. Every diplomatic interaction, every joint research project, every cultural exchange had potentially been an intelligence-gathering operation. Humanity hadn't been learning to fit into galactic civilization. They had been learning how to control it. Dr. Mortain presented her analysis to the increasingly desperate council leadership. Review of historical data shows that human representatives consistently asked questions that seemed harmless but actually revealed crucial information about our defensive capabilities, political divisions, and technological limitations. They've been conducting a 3-century intelligence operation right under our noses. But to what end? Demanded Zethkri. What could they possibly want that they couldn't have achieved through legitimate cooperation? The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the council archives, automated analysis systems had been working continuously since the crisis began, cross-referencing human activities with every available data point. What they discovered changed the entire context of the situation. Archivist Supreme Nethiel called an emergency session to present findings that defied belief. Colleagues, our analysis has revealed that humanity's apparent primitive technology wasn't just a deception, it was a test. They've been systematically evaluating our scientific, military, and social capabilities by presenting us with technological problems just advanced enough to challenge us, then observing our responses. The evidence was overwhelming once pointed out. Human crewed fusion reactors that had inspired council scientists to develop more efficient power systems. Human primitive weapons that had led to advances in council military technology. Human inefficient computer systems that had prompted innovations in galactic communication networks. They've been using us as a research and development laboratory, continued Nethiel. Every advance we've made in response to human technology has been quietly observed and analyzed. We've been improving their understanding of our capabilities while they've given us nothing of real value in return. The council chamber fell into horrified silence as representatives realized the scope of what they faced. Not just technological superiority, but strategic thinking on a scale that rendered their own planning efforts childish by comparison. The communication channels suddenly blazed with priority transmissions from across council space. The approaching fleet had begun deploying advanced reconnaissance craft that were conducting detailed scans of every inhabited system, military installation, and technological facility in their path. But these weren't preparation for immediate attack. They were cataloging assets with the methodical precision of beings who intended to manage those resources for the long term. They're not planning to destroy us, realized Admiral Thekvor with growing horror. They're planning to administrate us. As if in response to his statement, the communication systems received their second transmission from human space. This one was longer, more detailed, and infinitely more terrifying than the first. To the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, humanity acknowledges 3 centuries of educational interaction with your species. This period of assessment has now concluded. The Terran colonial expansion project will proceed according to long-established schedules. Current political structures will be evaluated for compatibility with optimized resource allocation and population management protocols. Species demonstrating cooperative potential will be integrated into the new administrative framework under appropriate supervision. Resistance will be discouraged through proportionate response measures. Detailed integration protocols will be transmitted upon completion of transition procedures. Estimated timeline for full implementation: 18 months standard galactic time. The message was signed simply, Terran Colonial Authority, Sector Administration Division. The words Colonial Authority and Sector Administration hit the council like physical blows. The language wasn't that of conquerors or invaders. It was the terminology of bureaucrats implementing a predetermined plan. Humanity wasn't attacking galactic civilization. They were processing it like any other colonial expansion project. Sector Administration Division, whispered Dr. Mortain. That implies multiple divisions, multiple sectors. They're treating our entire galaxy as just one region in a larger territorial structure. The scope of what they faced was becoming clear. The approaching fleet wasn't humanity's entire civilization. It was just the administrative and security forces responsible for managing their newest acquisition. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim lay a human empire of unknown size and capability, treating the conquest of established galactic civilization as a routine expansion project. Zethkri found himself struggling with concepts that challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. How long, he asked. How long have they been planning this? The answer came from the Taith collective consciousness, whose analysis of human behavioral patterns had reached disturbing conclusions. Based on consistent strategic indicators, preliminary planning began approximately 12,000 years ago. Active preparation and intelligence gathering started roughly 5,000 years ago. Direct infiltration and assessment operations commenced 3,000 years ago with the establishment of early contact protocols. 12,000 years, Elder Myeneth repeated numbly. They've been planning this since before our oldest civilizations achieved spaceflight. Which means, added Dr. Yithmos, that everything we think we know about galactic history may be wrong. Every accidental discovery, every natural development in civilization, every spontaneous alliance or conflict, any of it could have been guided or influenced by human intervention. The possibility that their entire understanding of galactic development had been manipulated by an outside force was too vast for most representatives to fully process. But the evidence was mounting that humanity's influence on galactic civilization extended far beyond their recent 3-century presence in the Council. Archaeological data began flooding in from academic institutions across Council space as researchers desperately searched for any trace of earlier human contact. What they found defied explanation: artifacts and technological influences that suggested human contact with various species dating back millennia, always disguised as natural development or independent innovation. They've been gardening us, realized Counselor Thax with growing horror. Like agricultural specimens. Encouraging development in certain directions, discouraging it in others, gradually shaping our civilizations to fit their long-term requirements. The approaching fleet continued its methodical advance, no longer attempting to hide its true capabilities. Vessels that dwarfed anything in Council space moved with casual disregard for conventional physics. Energy readings suggested power sources that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level. Communication intercepts revealed coordination systems that operated faster than light speed should allow. But perhaps most terrifying of all was the growing realization that this overwhelming display of force wasn't intended to intimidate. It was simply the standard operating procedure for colonial administration. The fleet wasn't showing off. It was just working efficiently. They're treating us like we treated them, observed Elder Vaitesh with bitter irony. Primitive species requiring management by their technological superiors. Except, corrected Admiral Thekfor grimly, we actually are primitive compared to them. As the crisis deepened, fault lines began appearing in the Council itself. Some species advocated immediate surrender, hoping that cooperation would earn them favorable treatment under human administration. Others demanded desperate military resistance, regardless of the odds. A few suggested trying to evacuate Council space entirely, though nobody could explain where an entire galactic civilization might flee. The debate was interrupted by another discovery that changed everything once again. Deep space monitors had detected additional fleets approaching from entirely different vectors, not just one direction, but from multiple points around the galactic rim. The force they had been tracking was just one of several human colonial expeditions converging on Council space simultaneously. Multiple approach vectors, reported Fleet Admiral Kefran with the flat tone of absolute defeat. Conservative estimates suggest at least 7 separate fleets, each comparable in size to the primary force. The scope of human power was beyond anything they had imagined. Not a single overwhelming fleet, but an entire colonial expansion program treating their galaxy as just another piece of territory to be acquired and administered. How? Asked Zethkri desperately. How did we miss something this massive? How did our intelligence networks, our long-range sensors, our exploration missions never detect any trace of this empire? Because, replied Dr. Mortain quietly, they didn't want us to detect it. We've been seeing exactly what they wanted us to see for thousands of years. As the representatives struggled with the magnitude of their situation, one final piece of information arrived that completed their understanding of humanity's true nature. Archaeological teams had discovered evidence of human presence in their galaxy dating back over 50,000 years, not recent infiltration, but ancient colonization efforts that had been deliberately concealed and then withdrawn, leaving only subtle influences on developing civilizations. "We're not their first colony," whispered archivist Supreme Nethiel. "We're not even their second. They've been doing this for tens of thousands of years across multiple galaxies." The representatives of galactic civilization sat in their crystal hall, surrounded by displays showing the approaching fleets, the compromised nature of their technology, the extent of human influence on their history, and the inevitable future of human administration over everything they had built. 3 centuries ago, they had welcomed humanity as harmless primitives requiring their guidance and protection. Now they understood that humanity had been studying them with the patient thoroughness of scientists observing laboratory specimens, waiting for the optimal moment to integrate them into an empire that spanned multiple galaxies. The humans had withdrawn silently because their assessment period was complete. Everything that happened next would be according to plans that had been made long before any current council member had been born, and there was absolutely nothing galactic civilization could do to stop it. The fourth day after humanity's withdrawal marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Great Revelation, the period when galactic civilization finally understood what they were truly facing. But for those living through it, it felt less like revelation and more like watching reality itself dissolve around them. In the emergency command center established in the council complex, representatives worked frantically to develop some kind of response to the approaching human fleets. Military advisors presented scenarios that ranged from hopeless to catastrophic. Diplomatic teams drafted surrender terms that might preserve some autonomy for council species. Scientific committees tried to understand technology that seemed to violate fundamental physical laws. But it was the intelligence analysis that proved most disturbing. As more data about humanity's true capabilities emerged, the scope of their deception became overwhelming. Every aspect of human presence in council space had been carefully orchestrated to create a completely false impression of their actual nature. "We've identified at least 47 instances of deliberate technological misdirection," reported Chief Analyst Forthek. "Human ships that appeared to use chemical propulsion while actually employing exotic matter drives. Human weapons that seemed primitive while incorporating force manipulation systems we still can't understand. Human computers that looked crude but were apparently quantum processing networks disguised as simple electronics." "The question," interrupted Admiral Thekfor, "is why go to such elaborate lengths to deceive us? If they possessed this level of technology 3 centuries ago, they could have simply conquered us then." The answer came from an unexpected analysis of human psychology conducted by the Xenobehavioral Research Team. Dr. Zenthala of the Psychological Assessment Division had been studying 3 centuries of recorded human interactions, looking for patterns that might explain their motivations. "Colleagues," she announced to the emergency session, "I believe humanity's deception serves multiple purposes, but the primary goal appears to be optimization of colonial integration. Our analysis suggests they were conducting a comprehensive assessment of our species' adaptability, resistance potential, and useful characteristics." The displays showed complex psychological profiles of every major council species, with detailed analysis of how each might function under human administration. The Corvani were assessed as excellent industrial workers due to their physical strength and hierarchical social structure. The Taith were evaluated as potential research assistants because of their collective intelligence and attention to detail. The Eldari were noted for their long lifespans and accumulated knowledge, making them valuable as historical archives and cultural advisors. "They weren't just studying our technology and military capabilities," continued Dr. Zenthala. "They were evaluating each species for optimal placement in a colonial labor structure." The implications were horrifying. Humanity hadn't been planning conquest in the traditional sense. They had been designing a comprehensive system for utilizing conquered populations according to their specific biological and cultural characteristics. not exterminating or oppression, but optimization for productivity within a larger imperial structure. This level of long-term planning suggests institutional thinking on a scale we've never encountered, observed Elder Kotharan. Not individuals making decisions, but entire civilizations operating according to multi-generational strategic frameworks. The communication channels suddenly erupted with reports from across Council space. The human fleets had begun transmitting detailed instructions to every inhabited system in their path. Not demands for surrender, but administrative directives for population management and resource allocation. The language was bureaucratic, efficient, and absolutely terrifying in its casual assumption of authority. Local administrators were instructed to prepare population censuses organized by species, skill sets, and economic productivity. Industrial facilities were directed to provide detailed inventories of equipment and output capacity. Military installations received orders to stand down and prepare for personnel reassignment to auxiliary security forces. They're not treating this as a conquest, realized Zethkri with growing horror. They're treating it as a corporate acquisition, where assets being transferred to new management. The administrative efficiency of the human approach was perhaps its most frightening aspect. No declarations of war, no dramatic ultimatums, no emotional appeals or threats. Just systematic implementation of predetermined procedures for territorial integration. The humans were processing the conquest of galactic civilization with the same methodical precision that the Council might use to approve new trade regulations. But even as panic spread through Council space, some species began responding to the human directives with surprising compliance. The bureaucratic nature of the instructions somehow made them seem legitimate, as if cooperation might lead to favorable treatment under the new administration. Reports began arriving of local governments actually implementing the requested population censuses and resource inventories. Colonial administrators who had spent centuries managing Council territories found themselves adapting their procedures to meet human requirements, often without explicit orders to do so. Mass psychology analysis indicates acceptance behavior in approximately 30% of Council populations, reported Dr. Zenthala. The human approach triggers institutional compliance reflexes that bypass individual resistance mechanisms. The genius of humanity's strategy was becoming clear. By approaching conquest as administration rather than warfare, they were encouraging cooperation from the very bureaucratic systems that governed Council space. Local administrators found it easier to comply with official-sounding directives than to organize resistance against unclear threats. They're using our own governmental structure against us, observed Councillor Thax. Our populations are trained to follow administrative orders from legitimate authority. The humans are simply presenting themselves as the new legitimate authority. But perhaps the most disturbing development came from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. Long-range sensors had detected something that defied all previous understanding of human capabilities. The approaching fleets weren't just using advanced technology, they were modifying local space-time to accommodate their operations. Energy signature analysis indicates large-scale manipulation of fundamental forces, reported Dr. Mortain with barely concealed terror. They're not just ignoring physical laws, they're rewriting them to suit their convenience. Entire star systems in the path of human fleets showed signs of temporal acceleration, allowing the human vessels to complete months of administrative setup in mere days. Gravity wells were being adjusted to optimize orbital mechanics for human installations. Even the background radiation of space itself was being modified to improve communication efficiency. They're terraforming reality, whispered Elder Vaitesh. Not just planets or star systems, but the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The scope of human power was beyond anything that could be resisted through conventional means. They weren't just technologically superior. They operated according to entirely different principles of physics and reality manipulation. As the crisis entered its fifth day, the first direct contact occurred between Council forces and human colonial administration. A Valerian patrol ship attempting to evacuate civilians from a border system encountered a human vessel conducting routine territorial surveys. The encounter was recorded and transmitted to the Council Emergency Command Center, providing the first direct glimpse of how humans conducted colonial operations. Valerian vessel, you are operating within designated human colonial territory. Came the transmission in perfect galactic standard. Please adjust your course to approved transit corridor 7 Alpha and reduce velocity to administrative safety limits. Evacuation operations are unnecessary and potentially disruptive to integration procedures. The Valerian captain, Admiral Yexthan, responded with traditional military protocols. This is Admiral Yexthan of the Valerian Empire Defense Force. You are illegally occupying Council territory. Withdraw immediately or face military consequences. The human response was delivered in the same calm, bureaucratic tone. Admiral Yexthan, territorial status has been updated according to approved colonial expansion protocols. Previous political arrangements are superseded by current administrative framework. Please consult updated navigation charts for proper transit procedures. Continued noncompliance may require intervention by security enforcement personnel. They're talking to us like we're traffic violators, Admiral Yexthan reported later. Not enemies or threats, just administrative problems to be resolved through proper procedures. The psychological impact of this casual dismissal of Council authority was devastating to military morale across the galaxy. Beings trained to think in terms of honor, courage, and martial valor found themselves reduced to administrative inconveniences in the eyes of beings who treated galactic conquest as a bureaucratic process. But it was the human response to Admiral Yexthan's threats that truly demonstrated the futility of Council resistance. When the Valerian ship activated weapons systems and assumed an attack posture, the human vessel didn't respond with hostility. It simply made the Valerian ship disappear. Not destroyed, not damaged, not disabled. Simply removed from local space-time and relocated to a position several light years away, completely unharmed but effectively neutralized without any display of force whatsoever. They didn't even consider us enough of a threat to justify defensive measures, Admiral Yexthan reported after his ship reappeared in Valerian space. They just moved us, like relocating furniture that was in the way. The demonstration of casual reality manipulation capabilities ended any serious discussion of military resistance among Council leadership. How could conventional forces oppose beings who could manipulate space and time as easily as moving objects around a room? As reports continued to arrive from across Council space, a pattern emerged in human colonial administration that was both efficient and strangely humane. Populations were being relocated and reorganized, but with careful attention to biological and cultural requirements. Economic systems were being optimized, but in ways that often improved living conditions for ordinary citizens. Political structures were being replaced, but with administrative frameworks that frequently provided better services than the original governments. They're not oppressing us, observed Trade Minister Yiltrao with confusion. They're managing us, like benevolent but absolute authorities. The analysis teams had identified the core of humanity's colonial strategy: total control combined with optimized well-being for subject populations. Not cruelty or exploitation, but systematic management designed to maximize both productivity and population happiness under human authority. Paternalistic imperialism, defined Dr. Zenthala. They genuinely believe they're improving our civilizations by bringing them under human administration. From their perspective, we were primitive societies that needed proper management to reach our full potential. The irony was almost unbearable. The species that Council civilization had considered primitive and in need of guidance had been viewing them in exactly the same way. Underdeveloped societies that would benefit from superior management and organization. As the sixth day dawned, the first human administrative centers began operating in Council space. Massive installations that appeared overnight, constructed with matter manipulation technology that assembled buildings and infrastructure from basic atomic components. The efficiency was breathtaking and terrifying. Local populations found themselves dealing with human administrators who were unfailingly polite, incredibly efficient, and absolutely uncompromising about compliance with new regulations. The humans weren't conquering through force or fear. They were conquering through superior organization and administrative capability. They're bureaucratically perfect, reported Governor Nethvos from a recently occupied Corvani world. Every process is optimized, every service is improved, every problem is solved efficiently. They're making our old government look incompetent by comparison. Perhaps that had been the point all along. Not to destroy council civilization, but to demonstrate its inferiority and replace it with something better. The humans weren't motivated by hatred or greed, but by a genuine belief that they could provide superior governance to species that had been managing their own affairs inadequately. As Zethkri sat in his office, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy, he finally understood the magnitude of what they faced. Humanity hadn't just hidden their technological superiority, they had hidden their cultural and administrative superiority as well. They were better at governing, better at organizing society, better at managing complex civilizations than any of the species who had considered themselves advanced. The humans had withdrawn silently because their assessment was complete. They had learned everything they needed to know about council species, their capabilities, their weaknesses, and their optimal role in a human-administered galaxy. And now the real work began. The systematic transformation of galactic civilization according to human standards of efficiency, productivity, and social organization. Whether council species liked it or not, they were about to discover what competent governance actually looked like. 1 year later, Zethkri stood in what had once been the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, now redesigned and renamed the Regional Coordination Center for Galactic Sector 7. The crystal walls remained, but they now displayed constantly updating data streams showing resource allocation, population welfare indices, productivity metrics, and administrative efficiency ratings across hundreds of worlds. The transformation had been swift, thorough, and undeniably effective. Where once the hall had hosted lengthy debates about territorial disputes and trade negotiations, human administrators now coordinated the governance of galactic civilization with quiet efficiency. Problems that had plagued council society for millennia had been solved within months of human administration. Former President Zethkri came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see Sarah Chun approaching, still wearing simple clothing, still maintaining the same unremarkable appearance that had once concealed the representative of the most powerful civilization in known space. Administrator Chun, he replied, offering the slight bow that human protocols required. The title was accurate. She now served as Senior Administrator for Integration Services, overseeing the transition of former council species into the human colonial framework. I thought you might appreciate a status report, she said, activating a holographic display that showed the current state of what had once been council space. Integration is proceeding ahead of schedule in most sectors. The statistics were remarkable and deeply humbling. Crime rates had dropped to near zero across all integrated worlds. Economic productivity had increased by an average of 300%. Healthcare outcomes had improved dramatically for every species under human administration. Educational systems now operated with efficiency levels that exceeded council standards by orders of magnitude. Your people seem to be adapting well, Chin continued, highlighting data specific to Valerian territories. The hierarchical structure of Valerian society translated easily to human administrative frameworks. Many of your former military officers have excelled in their new roles as sector coordinators. Zethkri nodded, though the word adapting felt inadequate for what had occurred. The Valerian Empire, like every other council member state, had effectively ceased to exist as an independent entity. Their territories were now administered as Regional Division 7C under the Terran Colonial Authority. Their citizens were now classified as Integrated Population Group 23, with specific administrative protocols designed to optimize their biological and cultural characteristics. What I still don't understand, Zethkri said carefully, is why you waited so long. If humanity possessed this level of capability 3 centuries ago, why the elaborate deception? Chin smiled, that same slight smile that had once made him uncomfortable. Because proper colonial integration requires comprehensive assessment of local conditions, population characteristics, and optimal administrative structures. Rushing the process would have resulted in suboptimal outcomes for everyone involved. 300 years of assessment. 300 years of data collection, yes. But The assessment actually took much longer than that. Chen gestured toward the displays showing the transformed galaxy. Did you know that human sociologists spent over 2,000 years studying the development patterns of galactic civilization before we even initiated direct contact? The scope of human planning continued to stagger him. Not decades or centuries, but millennia of observation and analysis before implementing their colonial strategy. The level of patience and long-term thinking was beyond anything council species had ever demonstrated. We learned early in our expansion that successful colonial integration requires understanding not just the current state of a civilization, but its historical development patterns, cultural evolution trajectories, and potential for optimization under different administrative frameworks, Chen explained. Hasty colonization produces resistance, inefficiency, and suboptimal outcomes for both the colonial authority and the integrated populations. So everything was planned? Even our technological development, our political structures, our guided, not planned, Chen corrected. We introduced certain influences and opportunities, but your species made their own choices about how to develop. We simply ensured that those choices occurred within parameters that would facilitate eventual integration. The admission confirmed what many former council members had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Humanity hadn't just hidden their presence in the galaxy. They had been actively shaping galactic civilization for thousands of years, gently steering development in directions that would make eventual human administration more effective. The great wars that unified the Corvani clans 5,000 years ago, Zethkri said slowly. The technological breakthrough that gave the Taith their collective consciousness. The philosophical enlightenment that shaped elderly culture. All natural developments, Chen assured him. But developments that occurred with access to certain resources, certain opportunities, certain pressures that helped guide them toward optimal outcomes. It was masterful manipulation on a scale that reduced even the most sophisticated council political maneuvering to the level of children playing games. Humanity had been running multi-millennial social engineering programs that shaped the fundamental development of entire civilizations. Why are you telling me this? Zethkri asked. Surely this information could undermine acceptance of human authority. Because, Chen replied, the transition period is essentially complete. Former council species have adapted to human administration with remarkable success. Revealing the scope of our preparation serves to reinforce the permanence of current arrangements while providing context that helps explain the effectiveness of our systems. She was right, of course. The transformation of galactic society under human administration had been so comprehensive and demonstrably beneficial that few beings seriously considered returning to the old council system. Crime was virtually non-existent. Economic prosperity was universal. Conflicts between species had been eliminated through optimized resource allocation, and quality of life had improved dramatically for ordinary citizens. Your former colleagues have adapted particularly well to their new roles, Chen noted, highlighting personnel records. Elder Myeneth serves as Cultural Heritage Preservation Coordinator, ensuring that valuable aspects of traditional societies are maintained within the new framework. Admiral Thekvor has been appointed as Security Liaison for Military Integration, helping former Council Defense Forces transition to auxiliary roles supporting human peacekeeping operations. The titles sounded impressive, and the roles were genuinely important, but they represented a fundamental shift in the nature of galactic civilization. Former council leaders now served as mid-level administrators in a human-controlled system, their expertise valued, but their independence completely eliminated. Even you found purpose in the new structure, Chen continued. Your performance as liaison for former political entities has been exemplary. The transition protocols you developed for council bureaucratic systems saved months of administrative reorganization. Zethkri had to admit that his new role was both meaningful and satisfying in ways his old position had never been. As president of the Galactic Council, he had spent most of his time managing political conflicts and bureaucratic inefficiencies. As a liaison in the human system, he actually solved problems and implemented improvements that directly benefited millions of beings across multiple worlds. The efficiency is remarkable, he admitted. Problems that took us years to address through council procedures are resolved in days under human administration. Proper administrative structure eliminates most sources of inefficiency, Chen agreed. When authority is clearly defined, resources are allocated optimally, and decision-making processes are streamlined, complex problems become manageable routine operations. The great irony was that humanity had succeeded in creating the kind of galactic civilization that the Council had always claimed to represent. True cooperation between species, efficient resource allocation, peaceful resolution of conflicts, and steady improvement in living standards for all populations. They had just accomplished it through absolute authority rather than democratic consensus. Do you ever wonder if we could have achieved this through partnership rather than conquest? Zethkri asked. Chen considered the question seriously. Historical analysis suggests not. Council civilization had reached a stable but suboptimal equilibrium. Political structures were too entrenched, economic systems too inefficient, and cultural conflicts too persistent to allow for fundamental reform through internal processes. External intervention was necessary to achieve optimal outcomes. You studied us for thousands of years, and concluded we were incapable of governing ourselves effectively? We concluded that you were governing yourselves according to your natural capabilities, which were limited by biological and cultural factors that precluded optimal organization. Not a moral failing, simply a practical limitation that required superior administration to overcome. The assessment was brutal in its clinical objectivity. Humanity hadn't conquered galactic civilization out of malice or greed, but because they genuinely believed council species were incapable of reaching their full potential without proper guidance. From the human perspective, colonial integration was a benevolent act that improved the lives of everyone involved. And the results support that conclusion. Chen continued, gesturing toward the displays. Average lifespans have increased across all species. Educational achievement has reached record levels. Economic security is universal. Interspecies conflict has been eliminated. Cultural expression flourishes within optimized frameworks. By every objective measure, galactic civilization is more successful under human administration than it ever was under council governance. The statistics were undeniable. Beings across the galaxy were healthier, safer, more prosperous, and generally happier than they had been under their own governments. The human system worked better than anything council civilization had ever achieved. What happens now? Zethkri asked. Is this the final form of galactic civilization, or merely another stage in human expansion? This sector represents successful integration of a moderately complex multi-species civilization, Chen replied. The administrative frameworks developed here will serve as templates for similar operations in other regions. Our expansion continues according to long-term development schedules. Other regions? Galactic Sector 7 is one of 43 sectors currently under various stages of colonial development. Some are more advanced civilizations requiring different integration strategies. Others are younger societies that need longer preparation periods before direct contact becomes appropriate. The scope of human operations was staggering. What they had considered the entirety of galactic civilization was just one modest project in a vast colonial empire that spanned multiple galaxies and operated according to planning timescales measured in tens of thousands of years. Humanity has been expanding for how long? Zethkri asked. Active colonization operations began approximately 50,000 years ago, but we've been monitoring and preparing target regions for much longer than that. The development of optimal colonial integration strategies requires extensive historical analysis. 50,000 years of expansion across multiple galaxies, with each operation conducted according to carefully developed strategies based on millennia of observation and analysis. The human empire wasn't just vast, it was methodical on a scale that made galactic civilization look like a brief local experiment. As Zethkri absorbed this information, he realized that his perspective on recent events was fundamentally limited. What felt like the conquest and transformation of everything he knew was, from humanity's viewpoint, just another successful completion of a routine colonial integration project. Do you regret it? Chen asked. The end of council independence? The loss of self-governance? Zethkri considered the question carefully. I regret the deception. I regret that we never had the opportunity to understand what we were truly dealing with. But the results. He gestured toward the displays showing thriving populations and efficient systems across hundreds of worlds. I cannot honestly say that what we have now is worse than what we had before. That's a common response among integrated populations, Chun noted. Most beings recognize that human administration provides better outcomes than their original governmental systems, even if they initially resent the loss of independence. Will we ever be considered truly equal to humanity? Define equality, Chun replied. You have access to the same healthcare, education, economic opportunities, and legal protections as any human citizen. Your cultural traditions are preserved and supported. Your natural talents are utilized in roles that maximize both personal fulfillment and social contribution. But we will never govern ourselves again. Government is a specialized function requiring specific capabilities, Chin explained. Just as you wouldn't expect a talented artist to perform surgery or a skilled engineer to conduct diplomatic negotiations, governance requires particular qualities that not all species possess equally. It was a kind but absolutely final answer. Humanity had concluded that other species could contribute to galactic civilization in many valuable ways, but lacked the capability to govern themselves effectively. Like children being raised by competent parents, they would be cared for, guided, and provided with opportunities to flourish, but they would never be trusted with ultimate responsibility for their own societies. As the conversation concluded and Chun departed to attend to her administrative duties, Zethkri remained in the transformed assembly hall, watching data streams that showed a galaxy operating with unprecedented efficiency under human control. The humans had withdrawn silently when their assessment period ended. They had returned with comprehensive plans for optimizing every aspect of galactic civilization according to their superior understanding of social organization and technological capability. The Galactic Council no longer existed, but galactic civilization was more successful than it had ever been. Former council species had lost their independence, but gained security, prosperity, and the guidance of beings whose capabilities exceeded anything they could have achieved on their own. It was conquest, occupation, and colonial administration. It was also improvement, optimization, and what could arguably be called liberation from the limitations of their own governmental inadequacies. 3 centuries ago, they had welcomed humanity as primitive newcomers requiring their guidance and protection. Now those same humans administered every aspect of their lives with benevolent but absolute authority, treating them as valued but incompetent populations requiring proper management. The irony was perfect, complete, and utterly inescapable. And as Zethkri watched the displays showing healthy, prosperous, efficiently governed populations across hundreds of worlds, he had to admit that the humans had been right about everything. They always had been.